Good afternoon. Today we'll talk about the intersection of sport marketing and television. Television rights, especially for major sport, provides a substantial source of revenue. Oftentimes, the aggregate revenue created by television rights far exceeds even the revenue created by your in-house attendance. Other sports, smaller sports, and more local sports, this would not be the case. But television really is beginning to dictate a heavy influence on sport in terms of scheduling games and the events themselves. We've seen many rules changes occur in our favorite sport that is designed to make it more exciting and much more interesting, primarily for a televised location. We see start times of major mega events around the world starting for a United States, predominantly in East Coast television marketplace. Oftentimes, events in many locations start at not great hours, especially for the athletes, but really designed for the television market. And networks rely on this programming to capture and captivate an audience. We're very much looking at a paradigm of television viewing where people will record it or watch it online at a different time. However, sports still is one of the major television programs that people consume as it is being competed. There's not much taping or recording and watching it at a different time. So we look at this idea of technology and measurements and how do we define this relationship between sport, the networks, the advertising agencies, the corporate clients that are all vying for attention, whether they're within the sport themselves or if they're advertising on the television. We see a lot of major players in place that are really influencing our sport. So in the sport business, television groups, this advertising agencies, buying groups. An ad agency will buy a block or a significant amount of advertising on a certain telecast in order to get discounts from the advertisers. The television networks do this because they can sell a increased amount of inventory at once. The advertisers can use this for their particular advertising clients. Corporate clients may negotiate directly with the networks. Some clients decide to own the telecast completely and create the entire production of it in one way or another. But the media buyer refers to a range of advertising spots purchased across a variety of networks and programs. The media buy typically uses additional forms of media such as radio, newspaper, magazines, outdoor billboards to support their television thematic. So why are sport programming attractive? It's visual, it's splashy colors, there's a huge drama to it. We discussed a lot of this in terms of why people consume sport and why do we spectate. It really is a fantastic television show in terms of some comedy, some drama, some tension. We're rooting for good guys versus bad guys. So the value of that television program really translates into a captive and very loyal audience. So how do we measure the television audience, especially when we're looking to see from an advertiser's point of view if this is a smart buy or not? We use a couple of different measurements. One is homes using television, number of homes where one television is watched at any point. We use that as our collective big number and then generate our program ratings. That is the percentage of households that is tuned into a particular program divided by the total households times 100. So a very large rating would indicate that a lot of people are watching it at that particular time. Another comparison that we look at is audience share. Maybe we look at audience share for a televised program that's not during a typical viewing hour. Audience share is the number of households that are tuned in at that particular time. So a high audience share may not necessarily translate back into high ratings depending on what time of day it may be. In other words, If a telecast is on local time at 2 in the morning and you're watching a huge sporting event, it may have a very large audience share. Maybe 50% of everyone watching television is watching that show. However, the program rating will be less because not many people will be up at 2 a.m. watching television totally. So we look at these rating points, whether there are target rating points, so we want to know exactly who is watching it. If they're within our market, then we certainly are much more attractive to that. And the measurements, especially by Nielsen and some other groups, really break out into a gross and also an average audience for an extended time. So we look at these different types of measurements to see what kind of value we're getting with this particular television program, if it's translating back into our advertisers wanting that particular target audience. Of course, if you're a sport manager and you're marketing via sport and your television ratings aren't that high and you want them to get higher, you need to evaluate how this can happen. So when we look at this advertising during sport programs, we can look at a couple of different methods. One is sponsorship, and sponsorship again is with the event itself. Now, it's very common, however, to say sponsor in terms of a TV advertiser, but they are subtly but very distinctly different. The sponsor may or may not have television rights to it, and a television advertiser may or may not be a sponsor. Oftentimes, a television advertiser won't be a sponsor of the event. So we look at different types of things that we can do. We can do opening, closing billboards, when you're showing either the broadcast itself or maybe some commentaries, some graphics around them. We look at logo association and promotion. We can look at mentions within there. We can look at 10, 30, or 60 second spots throughout the telecasts, as well as different types of placement in different areas. So really we're looking at a lot of creativity as we create these different television programs and these different television program commercials and advertising. We look at commercial avoidance and audience erosion as two related problems. We look at zipping and particularly zapping, where we're changing channels during commercials in order to avoid them. Certainly with new technology, we're looking at recording different shows, and we'll see those shows without commercials. We see this as dramatic impact on the value and effectiveness of our television campaigns. Two different viewpoints that we're looking at in terms of televised commercials. The more involved viewers are in a program such as sport, and the more they like it and they're engaged by it, such as sport, the weaker will be the advertising response. In other words, the commercial break represents an unnecessary intrusive element, otherwise enjoyable viewing experience. That point of view means if I'm really engaged in my swimming telecasts and commercials come on, I am going to reject those commercials because I want to watch swimming. The other side of it could be the characteristics of the program as subjectively perceived by the involved viewer produce efforts to minimize surrounding distractions and cause an enhanced orientation towards the program and source of the stimuli. Enhanced involvement prompts the viewer to remain active, producing a more positive impact on advertising effectiveness, meaning I am active and engaged and involved watching my swimming. Therefore, when a commercial comes on, I'm going to be more engaged and involved. These are very diametrically opposed viewpoints, but certainly something that we need to investigate and be aware of. Perhaps they're dependent on what type of product we're selling. If it's swimming related, we may be very engaged in it. If it's non-swimming, if it's a beverage, maybe then we are outside of that and we think that it's an intrusive nature into our sport. We're looking at many different types of interactive television. Certainly technology is certainly moving into that direction. We can watch like auto racing. We can specifically tune in a particular channel and watch the entire race from our favorite driver's perspective. So we're actually in the car with them as they're moving through traffic, as they're winning the race. That's something that's vitally different than what we've ever seen. We're seeing many different camera angles, both above and below and within the surface now of games. We're seeing cameras on goals, in the field of play, on the ice, and giving us points of view that we've never thought of before, certainly points of view that we may not be able to appreciate or to get if we're in the stadium themselves. So we're seeing television really affecting our sport offering.